"Get that old janitor out of my engine room. This is a multi-billion-dollar warship, not a museum piece." The voice of Lieutenant Commander Davies, sharp and laced with the arrogance of a man half his age and with twice the ambition, echoed off the steel bulkheads. The man he was shouting at, Arthur Finch, simply stood there, his back slightly stooped from decades of unseen burdens, his gray custodian's jumpsuit smudged with grease he hadn't even caused. He held a mop in one hand, a symbol of his current station, a stark contrast to the complex crisis unfolding around him. For 3 agonizing hours, the pride of the Atlantic Fleet, the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Vigilance, was dead in the water, its mighty engines refusing to roar to life. And the one man who held the key was being dismissed as nothing more than ombling old janitor. Type honor in the comments if you believe true heroes walk among us unseen. Arthur Finch had found a strange peace in the scent of industrial cleaner and the rhythmic squeak of his mop against polished linoleum. For the past 8 years, he had been a fixture at Norfolk Naval Station, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit who appeared before dawn and vanished after dusk. He was quiet, unassuming, and to the thousands of young, crisp uniformed sailors who bustled past him every day, he was utterly invisible. They saw a stooped old man with a slight, almost imperceptible limp and hands gnarled by age. They never noticed the way his pale blue eyes would track the flight path of an F-18 with geometric precision, or how he could diagnose a faint tremor in the pier's foundation that no one else felt. They didn't know that the quiet life he now led was a deliberate sanctuary, a self-imposed exile from a world of screaming turbines, catastrophic pressures, and life-or-death decisions made in the blink of an eye. The silence of the empty hallways at night was a balm on a soul that had lived a lifetime in the deafening heart of the machine. That morning, however, the silence was shattered. The USS Vigilance was scheduled for an urgent, high-stakes deployment to the Mediterranean, a show of force in a rapidly destabilizing region. But the Leviathan refused to stir. Deep within its metallic guts, a cascade of failures had silenced its 4 propeller shafts. The nuclear reactors were online, boiling water into steam with unimaginable power, but the final, crucial step, channeling that steam into the turbines to spin the gargantuan screws, was failing. A persistent, shrieking alarm signaled a main steam bypass lock, a condition the ship's state-of-the-art diagnostic systems insisted was impossible. On the bridge, the captain's face was a stony mask of controlled fury. In Washington, admirals and politicians were demanding answers. And in the engine room, Lieutenant Commander Davies, a celebrated prodigy from MIT with a perfect record, was facing the greatest humiliation of his career. He and his team of elite engineers had been fighting the Phantom for hours. They ran simulations on holographic displays, cross-referenced terabytes of data, and argued in a flurry of technical jargon that would have sounded like a foreign language to anyone else. They were the best of the best, armed with the most advanced technology the Navy could provide, yet they were utterly defeated by a problem that, according to their own manuals, shouldn't exist. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that seemed to press down on the entire ship. Arthur was mopping the corridor outside the main engineering access hatch, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't eavesdropping, but the frantic shouts and the panicked energy were impossible to ignore. He heard phrases, intercooler feedback loop, asynchronous pressure differential, digital governor phantom trip, and a picture began to form in his mind. It was a faint memory, a ghost from a different time, a different class of ship. It was a problem he hadn't thought about in 30 years. He watched a young ensign, his face pale and slick with sweat, stumble out of the engine room for a breath of air. The boy leaned against the bulkhead, his head in his hands. Arthur felt a familiar pang, not of pity, but of duty. A sense of responsibility he thought he had retired along with his uniform. He set his mop bucket aside and shuffled over, his worn work boots making soft sounds on the floor. "Excuse me, son," Arthur said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Is it a pressure lock in the primary steam manifold, caused by a vapor bubble in the governor valve?" The ensign looked up, his eyes glassy with exhaustion and confusion. Who are you?" he stammered. Davies, drawn by the voices, emerged from the hatchway, his face a thundercloud. "What is this? This is a restricted area. Who is this man?" "I think I can help," Arthur said calmly, ignoring Davies and speaking directly to the problem. "The new automated systems, they're too perfect. They can't account for a microscopic vapor lock. Creates a feedback loop. The computer thinks the valve is open when it's not. You have to persuade it." Davies's face contorted from frustration to incredulous rage. "Persuade it? What are you talking about? Are you insane?" It was then that he unleashed the dismissive shout, ordering the old janitor out of his engine room, a space he considered his sacred domain. He gestured for 2 burly master-at-arms to escort Arthur away. "We don't need folklore remedies from the janitorial staff," Davies spat. "We need engineering." Arthur didn't move. He simply held their gaze, his quiet dignity an unbreachable wall against the officer's fury. Just as the security officers reached for Arthur's arms, a voice like rolling thunder cut through the tense air. "Belay that order." The command was absolute, unquestionable. Every head snapped towards the source. Admiral Thorne, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, stood at the end of the corridor, his face etched with a gravity that silenced the entire deck. He had come to see the failure for himself, and he had found this bizarre standoff instead. His eyes scanned the scene, the defeated engineers, the fuming lieutenant commander, the security detail, and then they landed on the old man in the gray jumpsuit. The admiral froze. His stern expression melted away, replaced by a wave of stunned disbelief, then dawning recognition, and finally, a look of profound, almost reverent awe. "Finch?" he breathed, the name a whisper of disbelief. He took a step forward. "Artie? Artie the Ghost Finch." The name meant nothing to Davies or his team. They just saw an admiral who seemed to know their janitor. But for Admiral Thorne, it was like seeing a legend walk out of the pages of history. He strode forward, his powerful steps eating up the distance. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't clap the man on the shoulder. He stopped 2 feet in front of Arthur Finch, drew himself up to his full, imposing height, and rendered the sharpest, most respectful salute of his entire 40-year career. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ship's ventilation. Davies stared, his mouth agape. "Admiral, you know this custodian?" He finally managed to ask, the word custodian sounding absurd even to his own ears. Admiral Thorne slowly lowered his salute but kept his eyes locked on Arthur. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon Davies with the force of a physical blow. "Custodian?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Lieutenant Commander, the man you just tried to throw out of your engine room is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Arthur Finch. We called him the Ghost because he could go where no one else could and fix what no one else could touch. He didn't just study nuclear propulsion. He helped invent it. The very engine system you are failing to operate is based on a prototype he designed at Groton in 1998. The operational manual you have been fruitlessly consulting is a watered-down summary of his doctoral thesis on thermodynamic transference in closed-loop systems." The admiral took a step closer to Davies, whose face had drained of all color. "This man has forgotten more about steam turbines than you and your entire team will ever know." Thorne's voice rose, filling the corridor, a history lesson delivered with the force of a reprimand. He told them about a mission during the Cold War, a deep-sea espionage run where the USS Olympia, a fast-attack submarine, suffered a catastrophic failure in its primary coolant loop. A hairline fracture was releasing radioactive steam. Alarms were screaming. The sub was dying. Without hesitation, Finch, then a young CW02, wrapped himself in lead-lined blankets, crawled into a space no bigger than a coffin, and manually welded the pipe shut while being blasted with scalding, irradiated vapor. He saved 130 souls that day and prevented an incident that could have sparked a war. The limp he walked with wasn't from old age. It was a permanent reminder of the radiation burns that had nearly cost him his leg. The admiral turned back to Arthur, his expression softening. "Artie, the Vigilance is dead in the water. Can you help us?" Arthur Finch gave a slow, simple nod. He handed his mop to the stunned ensign and walked past the ashen-faced Davies, who looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Arthur entered the engine room, a cathedral of steel and copper, and the cacophony of alarms seemed to diminish in his presence. The young engineers, who moments before had seen him as a nuisance, now stared at him as if he were a visiting deity. He didn't look at their holographic displays or their complex readouts. He simply listened. He closed his eyes, placing a hand on a railing, feeling the soul of the ship through the vibrations in the deck plates. After a moment, he opened them. "I need a hammer," he said. A 2-pound ball peen, one of the engineers, speechless, scrambled to the tool locker and handed it to him. A hammer. Their multi-billion-dollar solution was a hammer. Arthur navigated the labyrinth of pipes and conduits not by schematic, but by a memory 30 years old. He found the specific valve housing, a hardened steel block covered in sensors. He laid his gnarled hand upon it, feeling for the subtle, incorrect vibration. "There you are," he whispered. Then, with a focus that was terrifying in its intensity, he raised the hammer. He struck the housing 3 times, not with brute force, but with a precise, resonant tap, a musician tuning his instrument. Clang, clang, clang. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a deep shudder ran through the ship. A low hum started, a sound of immense power waking from a forced slumber. The hum grew into a vibration, and the vibration grew into a ground-shaking, triumphant roar as 300,000 horsepower surged to life. The lights on the control panel flashed from red to a brilliant, solid green. The USS Vigilance was alive. It had taken Arthur Finch less than 5 minutes. He walked out of the engine room, wiping a smear of fresh grease from his hands with a rag he pulled from his pocket. The news had spread through the ship and onto the pier with the speed of an electrical current. The corridor was now lined with sailors, officers, and deckhands, all standing in silent, awestruck reverence. They had formed a spontaneous honor guard. As Arthur emerged, a path cleared for him. Lieutenant Commander Davies stood directly in his way, his body rigid, his face a canvas of shame and newfound respect. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he swallowed his pride, snapped to attention, and delivered a salute that was trembling, but sincere. "Sir," he choked out. I apologize." Arthur simply met his eyes, gave a slight, forgiving nod, and continued on his way, walking through the corridor of sailors who now saw him for who he truly was. Admiral Thorne met him at the end. "You know, Artie," he said, draping a heavy arm over the smaller man's shoulders. "I asked you to stay on as an instructor. You could have been teaching these kids." Arthur looked out at the water, at the now vibrating carrier ready to meet its destiny. "My Helen loved the quiet," he said softly, a reference to his late wife. "After she was gone, I just wanted to be near the ships. They're the only other things that ever made sense to me. This job? It's quiet." The next morning, a small, newly engraved brass plaque was permanently affixed to the engine room entrance of the USS Vigilance. It read, CW05A, Finch's governor valve. In case of emergency, tap 3 times. Lieutenant Commander Davies was seen personally polishing it every day for the rest of the deployment. Arthur was offered any job, any rank, any honor, but he humbly asked to keep his position as a custodian. His work was the same, but he was no longer invisible. Young sailors would now stop him, not with complaints, but with questions, hoping for a story, a sliver of wisdom from the quiet legend who walked among them. True greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet whisper of experience in a world that only listens to the shouting. It's the hidden worth in the people we overlook every single day. If you believe every person deserves respect, regardless of their station in life or the uniform they wear, subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the unseen heroes.